welcome to the channel and welcome to this episode of the Sunday Sum Up. Hope you're having a good weekend. It is Sunday, so I'm actually recording on Sunday like I should. I have made the decision though, I will no longer be doing the Hollywood news, the streaming TV show news or anything like that. I'm going to segregate that out to a totally different, I won't say show, but maybe just different videos altogether. So from now on, the Sunday Sum Up will just be gaming. So that's really what I'm going to focus on. And that's really kind of what I like to talk about the most. I do love talking about Hollywood stuff. You know, there's the She-Hulk show or whatever the hell it is that debuted. Haven't watched it yet, but I'm going to. I'm almost done with Better Call Saul, a couple of episodes behind. So there's plenty to talk about on the I guess entertainment side of things. You know, the other thing was Lord of the Rings. That show's coming up soon. So there's things to talk about, but it's too bulky of a sit down for me. Like to sit here for 2+ hours, and I get it. Sometimes I just ramble and talk too much, and I sort of rabbit hole into certain topics, and that's on me. But I think to help me make these videos a little bit cleaner and a little bit tighter, I'm going to start dividing them up. So gaming on one side, entertainment on the other. And I really like talking about the gaming stuff. Like I said before, that's more of my forte. You know, if there's anything that I would consider myself not just a normie in, would be gaming. I'm still just a normal person, and, you know, but I am kind of, I wouldn't call myself like a nerd in that regard, but I've just been gaming for so long. You know, I started gaming back in the 80s, and I have stuck with it. It's just been my hobby for over 3 decades. So I have plenty to say, you know. But this week, I just want to talk about one thing, only one topic, because this, I guess you could call it a story. This little story broke a couple weeks ago, and it just fucking blew up. Like, just completely blew up and turned into something that me personally, I didn't think much about it. When I read, we'll get into it. When I read this article, I think it was an article I read. No, I'm sorry. I listened to a video and then I went and read an article. And I didn't think anything about this. And then all of a sudden it just turned into this really big sort of console war back and forth, which to me, I love it. I think it's great. I think console war talk and, you know, fanboy fights are funny. I love them. I think they're fun to listen to. They're fun to debate and that type of shit. So, but to me, I just didn't really think this was that big of a deal, but it got traction. And also too, and I've said this before, the summer months for gaming are really slow, like really slow. Usually it's like May, you might get a big release at the beginning of May, but that's pretty much it. So then it's the rest of May, June, July are just dead. There's no big games that come out. A lot of indie titles, AA games that they usually drop in. And also news is kind of slow. Typically, June would be rescued by E3, and all the big shit that would come out of E3 would pretty much, you know, it would be enough for media sites and creators to ride the waves of the announcements, the announcements that came out that were good, and the ones that came out and just bombed. You know, the technical problems or the real cringy dialogue on stage and shit from these studios and from Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. Well, not Nintendo so much, but regardless, there usually was a nice little wave of information to ride out until the game started dropping again in the fall. But E3 hasn't happened. I think this is the second year there hasn't been an E3. So it's been really like extra dry in the gaming news. So getting into this topic, what happened was the Microsoft purchase of Activision Blizzard has been, I can't remember when the announcement was. I thought it was at the beginning of this year, like January. So it's been going on for months. The announcement was huge. It is a very big deal. It's a huge purchase on just a dollar level amount. It's like 69 point something billion. So we're just saying $70 billion. And also Activision and Blizzard are very large companies, and they have some really strong IP in their stable. So Microsoft getting them was really good for Microsoft. It's a big deal. But you don't just go in to a boardroom, say, hey, we're going to buy you, and then I'll have my lawyers contact your lawyers in a couple of weeks. We'll get this deal wrapped up. On a deal this size, it takes not only just a bunch of red tape, but there's also regulatory things from like government, the FTC, oh my God, I just drew a blank. I just read that. I can't remember what it's called, but anyways, it's basically just a government oversight, which you know how I feel about that. But regardless, there is some good to oversight on large corporations vacuuming up other corporations, because it can become a conflict of interest. It can become a monopoly, a real problem for the market. I don't think that's what's going on here. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's why there's so much legal crap that corporations have to go through when they make big purchases like this. And, it is what it is, whatever, $1 trillion problems, right? But there was some legal documents came out from Brazil, which I guess there's a commission down there that companies were being asked to submit any sort of concerns regarding the purchase of Activision Blizzard by Microsoft. Could it be detrimental to the industry? That's pretty much what it was. And Sony responded, and they were the only one to respond in a negative light. Like, they were the ones that kind of complained, which makes sense. Sony, PlayStation and Xbox are direct competitors. Okay, Nintendo really doesn't compete with them. They're in their own space, which is totally fine. They're a huge corporation themselves. They have a great product. They have great IP. They make really great games. So they're on their own. But Microsoft and Sony are just like these two just heavyweights going back and forth. And they have been since the Xbox, the original Xbox and PlayStation era. So, I'm sorry, PlayStation 1 era. So the stuff that came out, to me, I didn't really think it was that big of a deal, but it turned into something really big. So the claims by Sony were that the deal was bad for gaming because Call of Duty specifically doesn't have a rival. Okay. To me, I think that's totally fair. I agree with Sony in that regard. And I also don't think that them saying something or being the one to lobby against this, it's total business. I don't think anything about it. To me, this was really nothing. I was like, yeah, of course they're going to say something. And if the shoe were on the other foot and Sony was purchasing Activision Blizzard, Microsoft stepping up and saying this is bad for the industry would be totally acceptable to me. It'd just be, yeah, of course they're going to. And furthermore, that's not going to kill the deal. Like, what they're saying, they don't have any real legs, in my opinion. And obviously legally, I don't think they have any legs to stand on. These are just concerns and complaints from another corporation, a competing corporation. So to me, I didn't really care. But them, Sony being them, when they came out and said what they said in these documents, and again, this wasn't like a press release. This wasn't Sony standing in front of a podium and saying these statements. It wasn't, Jim Ryan, tweeting this out or anything like that. This was just legal talk, legal speak. To me, the first thing that I noticed was there was a lot of tone being added. There was a lot of tone being added to the text. Like, there was a lot of creators and commenters were contextualizing what was written. And I never think that's a good idea. When I read a text from somebody, or if I read an email, I don't ever, I can say this. I do everything in my power mentally to not add tone to an email or a text, because I don't want to assume someone's popping off. I don't want to assume someone has an attitude, or they're getting loud with me, or they're being rude to me. And that's real common. A lot of people, I've listened to people tell me that, oh, so-and-so texted me and they said blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, and then, but they read the text to me in this snooty ass tone, and they get the head moving like, oh, then they said this and and they sort of add tone to that text. It's like, well, you don't know that's how they were saying that. Like I could say the same thing in a real gentle, calming tone, and it would have a totally different it would add a totally different context to the conversation. That's kind of how I felt about this. I felt like there was a lot of feelings being added to Sony's complaint about Call of Duty, and I just don't think that's a good idea. To me, I try not to do that as best as I can. Now, I want to stick on that point for just a second, and I do have a lot of notes here. This is why this is one topic, and hopefully I won't take too long on this, but there's a lot of things that I want to get into, because when this happened, when the first video that I saw on YouTube come out, I was like, what's going on? And okay, so then I went and pulled up a couple articles and read some things, and I was like, okay, whatever. But the creators out there, man, they were really running with a tone, and the tone was that Sony's scared, Sony's running from Microsoft, they're doing everything they can to kill the deal, and blah blah blah. And I was like, okay, I don't get that, and I really didn't think that was going to get traction, but it did. People went nuts with this shit, and I have been listening to. I mean, I'd probably say in the neighborhood of like 8 to 10 different creators, some big creators with a big following, but majority have been smaller channels, with the smaller sub counts, and the 2,000 views versus the 250,000 views, just to sort of get a pulse reading of sort of the community as a whole, the best that you can, right? It's still a small sample size, but regardless, I don't I don't like to listen to just like the biggest channels, because to me, a lot of big channels, whether it's Team Blue or Team Green, they are there for their audience, and they have a base that they need to play to. So I don't take a lot of what they say to heart. I think a lot of it is just they need to play to their base. So whatever, and that's fine. That's totally fine. But this whole thing with this getting back to my notes, because like I said, I have so many, and I listened to so many videos and read so many comments. I was just like, man, there's a lot I have to say about this. So the Call of Duty has no rival claim from Sony is true. Like, that's absolutely a fact. And I've listened to so many podcasters over the last decade talk about Call of Duty and how Call of Duty is its own thing. The genre of Call of Duty is FPS, first-person shooter. There are tons of first-person shooters out there, tons in the market right now. There's so many that it's just sort of it's just a regular genre to me. It's not like, okay, this is a Call of Duty competitor. It's just, this is a first-person shooter game. But Call of Duty is its own thing. Call of Duty to me, Call of Duty is to first-person shooters that Band-Aid is to adhesive bandages. People use the term Call of Duty like it is first-person shooters. Okay? Like, Band-Aid is not, like, everyone says, can I get a Band-Aid? And it's not really what they're asking for. They're asking for an adhesive bandage. But Band-Aid is so synonymous with, like, the name, first of all, is perfect. And it's just so synonymous with adhesive bandages that no one asks for that. They don't say, hey, can I get an adhesive bandage? First of all, it's kind of a mouthful. It's quicker to say Band-Aid, but not every bandage is a Band-Aid. It's so weird. It's kind of like the jacuzzi hot tub thing. And that's not a bad thing. That's good for Call of Duty. I mean, that to me, they have built such a brand that has such a huge following. We're talking about not just in gaming space. It has evolved, and I think it's definitely waning. It has been waning over the last, I'd say, 3 to 4 years. But when it was peaking, Call of Duty had everyone talking about it. There were so many cool Call of Duty commercials that had really big name actors in them, and they were really funny. They had high production, and they're really good. There were some of the best gaming advertisements have been for Call of Duty, and everyone was playing it. At one point, it was just the game to play. And I don't think they do have a rival. I agree with Sony 100%. I don't think that negates the deal going through. I don't think that Microsoft should be allowed to purchase Activision Blizzard because of Call of Duty being so synonymous with first-person shooters. It's just, sorry, Sony, you just got to deal with it. They are a $1 trillion company. They have the money to do this, so deal with it. I personally, I said this before, I don't think this deal is going to fall through. This is 100% going through. A lot of this is just smoke. It's all grandstanding. This is going to happen. So, but I do agree with Sony's claim. I do 100% agree. Call of Duty it doesn't have a rival. It really doesn't. Battlefield was really trying to. They were the one that was closest to them in terms of FPS because they were a military shooter. And it was the gameplay with Battlefield was very close to COD, but Call of Duty to me is just speed, running. It's just so much twitch. It's like how fast are your reflexes from your hand-eye coordination? Like how good is it? That's really going to determine your wins and losses in a multiplayer game. Battlefield, which I actually like I did before Battlefield 2042, but like Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, I preferred them over Call of Duty once I found them because it was just a different type of game. Battlefield is different. There are those twitchy reaction times that do matter, but there's also vehicles that you can fly and drive and ride on. You know, there's boats and there's jets, helicopters, tanks, APCs, quads. You know, there's a lot of shit going on, and Battlefield always had a large player count. There was the war that you were waging against your opposing team was like, I don't know what the highest count was on PC, but on console, it was like, what was it, like 40 on 40 or 50 on 50? I don't even remember, but that's a lot. And in Call of Duty, it was like, and in its peak, it was like 16 on 16. I think that was like the biggest. So it's just a different type of game to me. And I personally think Battlefield 3 and 4 are better than Call of Duty, any Call of Duty, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Now, having said that, I've spent so many hours on Call of Duty, I can't even tell you. I couldn't even venture to guess how many hours I've spent on Call of Duty because I really like Call of Duty. It's a really good franchise. It is very solid. It's what all first-person shooters get measured against, and for good reason, because it is that type of quality. So, but getting back to this whole argument here. So, Microsoft, when this stuff came out, it was like, oh, Sony's trying to cut out Microsoft's leg, and this is, they're scared, and yada, yada, yada. I was like, okay, I don't think so, but whatever. It was really the comeback that Microsoft threw back at Sony, and they threw it publicly. They publicly made a statement about this. This wasn't, I don't recall that this was them reading their documents, like their response, their legal response. This was something that they actually put out. Okay. And what they essentially said was that, let me see what I got here. Got so many notes. Okay. So they came back and initially, now actually, you know what? That's not true. Let me back up. That's right. Because there's like 3 different passes here. So Sony makes their comments, or their legal argument about Call of Duty. And then Microsoft responded in the legal documents as a response. And they said essentially that Call of Duty wasn't that big of a deal, and that the IP that Blizzard and Activision have aren't really that special. Okay. Once again, that's what they have to say. That's totally in line in a corporate world. That's totally, it fits. It's what they should do. They need to say that. They can't agree with Sony. They can't say how great the IP are and just how special and how much money they're going to make off of it. They can't do that. They have to play this down. Legally, that makes total sense. I'm fine with that. I personally didn't think that was that big of a deal, but people ran with that one too. And it was like, it was kind of, I felt like this piece of them saying this, that Call of Duty wasn't that big of a deal and that the IP wasn't special, it was really hypocritical from a layman's standpoint. Like myself, I was like, yeah, right. Come on. Of course, like, then why are you paying $70 billion? If it sucks or if it's not that good, you would not be forking over this much money. Okay. they're worth $70 billion. Okay. You've evaluated that. You're paying $70 billion. So don't try to tell, the world that the IP is not that big of a deal to you. It is. But again, I understand. I get why they said that. I get why they came back and said that. I think they had to. But the videos and creators that I was listening to, they really just didn't focus on that. I think there's only one channel that I listened to, and it was actually the first time I heard the news. The guy was kind of poking fun at both. He was like, Sony said that Call of Duty doesn't have a rival and blah blah blah, and they're grandstanding for legal purposes. And then the response from Microsoft was, he was kind of making fun of them, like, oh, okay, really, this isn't a big deal. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Of course, this is a big IP, so Microsoft, they're kind of bullshitting. But after that, all I heard was just Sony is trying to kill the deal. And there was a lot of comments, and it was like, Sony's running scared, they're terrified, blah, blah, blah. Microsoft's coming, 2023. And we'll get into all that. But to me, I was like, well, what about Microsoft? Like what they said, okay, because if we're going to sit here and knock Sony for what they said, Microsoft should get some scrutiny, right? Because they're totally full of shit. Call of Duty is huge. Diablo is huge. World of Warcraft is huge. These are very big IP that they're trying to cash in on. So, but no one wanted to talk about that. Okay, whatever. Then the thing that really sort of got me, where I was like, okay, this is starting to get irritating. This is starting to get a little frustrating. So Microsoft came back again and said that Sony was blocking games from Game Pass, and that's their business strategy has been to spend money to block Microsoft from making deals with third-party developers and blocking them from Game Pass specifically. Okay. Okay. First of all, if you don't know, and like I said, I've been around this and paid attention to gaming for a very long time. They both block. Okay. Sony does block games from Microsoft. Or I'm sorry, just from Xbox as a whole. Okay. And so does Microsoft. They block games from Sony as a whole, as a company. Okay. Sorry about that. This isn't news. Okay. But it was being treated like it was. Media, there was tons of headlines, plenty of creators. I mean, like I said, I watched so many videos, listened to so many opinions, and I've read so many comments over the last 10 days, 2 weeks, however long it's been. It was just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what are we talking about here? Because in the term blocking kept getting in quotes, and all of a sudden this is a thing. Now there's like this, it's like the common use thing for Sony, like, oh, they block Microsoft, and they play dirty, and this is bad for gaming. This is bullshit, okay? And I've listened to plenty of creators who know that's bullshit. Like, I see you, okay? I see you creators, you big name creators who are out there talking about Sony blocking Microsoft and keeping games off Game Pass. That's bullshit. You know it's bullshit. Microsoft does the same thing. They block, and to me, I've never used that term. I have never used it, and it's so funny because blocking is now the new term for exclusives. Okay? Exclusives they've been going on for decades. Microsoft and Sony pay third-party studios money, a lot of money, for exclusive rights to their games. Not all their games, but specific titles, They do it to keep the game on their console so that their console will sell. Software sells hardware. That's just the name of the game. And I've never really understood this argument in the industry as a whole, because I've witnessed this for a very long time. This is something that I don't think anything about. I don't think twice about exclusivity. I just don't. I know that both corporations do this, and it's good for their business, and why wouldn't they, right? It started to change a little bit. It sort of morphed into a little bit more of exclusivity windows where you would have content. And that's another thing too. It wasn't just the whole game. Sometimes it was just content. I'm thinking of like Call of Duty back in the 360 PS3 era. Microsoft was paying Activision money, additional monies, made a deal with them to get exclusive rights to have early access to like map packs. And I think even weapons too. I could be wrong, but I know map packs for sure. And that was just something that was like, to me, I was like, that sucks, but whatever. Because I didn't have an Xbox 360. And again, I've said it a million times. That was a mistake. PS3, I think PS3 is definitely a really good console, and it has a place in my heart as a gamer. But at the time, I could only afford one console, and I went that way. And I was like, dang, I should have went 360, because 360 just better controller, online gaming. There was a lot that Xbox did right in that 360 era. And I always feel like, dang it, I missed that. I wish I could have been in that ecosystem, because it was a really great time from what I understand. But regardless, Microsoft was still paying for exclusive content for their console, for Xbox users, for Xbox gamers. If you bought Call of Duty on their console, and if you played it on their console, you would get everything first. Now, again, this is when Call of Duty was banging. It was really on the uptick. They were, after Call of Duty, to me, like, I think 3 to me was I really liked Call of Duty 3. I really, really liked it. Had a lot of fun with it, but it was Modern Warfare. Modern Warfare was the game. That was the one that just blew everyone away, blew me away, and all the gamers. Everyone was living in that space. Like, it was just the game to play. But I think that, getting back to this exclusivity stuff, I think that Microsoft did the right thing. They wanted to get more consoles sold, so they made a deal to get map packs. And again, who cares? And furthermore, Sony has done the same thing. Sony did the same thing with Destiny. They had exclusive rights. They paid additional monies to get exclusive rights to specific weapons that weren't even on the other console, to get content first on their console first. So to me, I just thought it was like, tit for tat, whatever, no big deal. But boy, as someone who listened and was really knee deep in the gaming space in that era for I'd say from about 2010 to about 2018, I was just living and breathing gaming. That's the only thing I watched on YouTube, articles, podcasts. That's all I did. Man, when Sony was getting exclusive shit for Destiny, I used to listen to Destiny podcasts, and they would just cry and bitch about how it was bad for gaming, and this is dirty pool, and this sucks for Xbox gamers. This is bad for Xbox. This is bad for gaming because, Sony's being the evil corporation and they're being stingy and shit. And I was like, really? Because that wasn't what you said in the 360 era. That's not what the conversation was, very smart. It was super smart. Good job, Microsoft. So I have seen and heard that for a lot of my time reading articles, watching videos around gaming. Microsoft always gets the cover run from them. Media covers for them in a big way. A lot of the media, because nowadays it's like media has, when you say media, there's the big brands like GameSpot, Game Informer, IGN, but there's so many of those old editors and writers for those corporations that have broke away, and now they have their own companies and shit, and good for them, right? Ain't no problem with that. But now they're all got their own YouTube channels and whatnot. But even then, I was still listening to these people that worked for these corporations in the media, and then they would come out and make these bitchy little complaints about Sony doing this with Destiny. To me, I was just like, really? God dang, your fucking memory is really short, because you weren't saying that in the 360 era, but whatever. So getting back to what, like this Activision thing, yes, Sony does block Microsoft. Microsoft blocks Sony, and it is exclusivity. It's what has been going on for decades. Okay. And the thing that I really get annoyed with is the selective memory from the Team Green side, because I was blown away by some of the arguments that I was reading, some of the comments that I was reading, the arguments that I was hearing, okay, it's always funny because whenever Sony does something like this with exclusivity, like when you're talking about like Destiny, then in the PS4 era, Sony made a deal with Activision to get exclusive shit to to PlayStation first through Call of Duty. They wanted to get Call of Duty shit on their console first. They made the deal that Microsoft previously had. So like anytime there was a commercial for Call of Duty, it was always like PlayStation was at the end. It was blue and it would show their system, and it wasn't exclusive at all, but they paid for that advertising. And I think they paid it for like map packs early and shit. All of that time, all I heard was that it's bad for gaming. Like anytime Sony pulled the exclusivity card, it was bad for gaming. More people, this is the third party studio. This isn't right. Sony has their own first party studios. That's different, but this is a third party studio and they're locking games away. That's not cool. They're locking content. That's cool. That's not cool. It's bad for gaming. And it's like, man, shut the fuck up. Like that's just crying. You're just complaining. Okay. And furthermore, there was no argument to be made. The argument was always, it's bad for gaming. That's it. When KOTOR got announced just recently, like a year and a half, something like that, when the teaser came out and it was going to be a PlayStation exclusive, right away, the usual suspects who claim to be agnostic, I always hear this shit too. It's always annoying. I have a PlayStation. I play PlayStation. I play most of my games on Xbox. Okay. I just prefer that ecosystem, but I have a PlayStation, so I'm not a fanboy. And it's like bullshit. Then what are you talking about then? And of course it was like KOTOR being exclusive to PlayStation is bad for gaming. Same argument. And it's just, that shit's so tired. I'm just done with that shit. And it's so funny because, when I say the short-term memory, it was like no one was really capping back at these people, and it was like everyone was like, yeah, I'd read the comments like, yeah, this is so messed up and, this isn't right. And, this is Sony's dirty game and yada, yada, yada. And it was like, to me, I was like, what about Tomb Raider, State of Decay, Titanfall, Sunset Overdrive, Ori and the Blind Forest? Okay. So, and before anybody jumps out of their chair, when anybody said anything about that in the comment sections, or even if it was brought up on a creators, like on a panel or something, it was always, well, Microsoft published those games. They helped to publish those games. So that's different. Like, really? Because I don't see the difference. That doesn't mean shit to me. And it doesn't mean shit to the gamers either. Okay. Microsoft. So let's like just the games that I named off was like Tomb Raider. Okay, that game, when the reboot came out, it was on Sony and it was on PlayStation and Xbox. It was for both consoles, third-party studio. Then the studio was having trouble, like they weren't going to be able to get the funding to make their second game. So Microsoft swooped in, threw down all the money so that they can finish the game and made the second game an exclusive for a year on their console. And that was being touted as like so smart, so savvy. Microsoft is so smart because they know that Sony has a lock on third-person adventure games. And they always referenced Uncharted. Like, this is Microsoft's response to Uncharted. And I was like, well, wait a minute. No, that's not true. This isn't their studio. This isn't their IP. This isn't their game. They're just blocking it from Sony for a year. But it was smart. It was savvy. It was so good for them. And it was so annoying. Like that shit just always got overlooked. And it was so frustrating because I would listen to that argument all the time. And I was like, and furthermore, there was the other thing too, was, right before that Tomb Raider thing happened, Phil Spencer was on some panel or something at E3 and he was getting asked some questions and they always they're lobbing softballs and, it's an Xbox, podcaster / writer who's asking these questions. So they're just there to fucking, fluff the guy and tell the guy how great he is and how great Xbox is. And one of the things, and I'll never forget this, Phil Spencer said that he had, and Xbox had they had no intentions of keeping games off of other consoles just to keep it on their own. So they weren't interested in quote unquote blocking anybody. When I heard that statement, I was like, well, that's kind of silly. Why would you even say that? Because you pay for exclusive deals, but okay, whatever. It's like, exclusives happen. There's not a bad thing. It's normal. It's very common in the gaming space, but he goes out of his way to say that shit. They're not interested in blocking games or keeping games locked away on their console. Literally, like a month later, Tomb Raider, that information came out, and that it was Xbox exclusive. And then they marched it out in front of, E3 or whatever, and Xbox fans were pounding their chests like, oh yeah, look at that, Uncharted what? Uncharted who? And it's like, really? Okay, whatever. And furthermore, this is going to be on PlayStation in a year, so I'll just play it then. And I actually like the game. I've played all three of them, beat the first one, almost finished the second one, but just kind of got tired. I played so much of the game. Like I said, I'm kind of a completionist, so when I get into these games, I spend a lot of time just looking under every rock, trying to find every collectible, and then it sort of wears out. It's welcome after a while, but that's just my own thing. I played the third one. I thought it was really fun, really pretty. I liked the story. Everything was cool. Those are really, really good games, a really good reboot, in my opinion. So I got nothing against Tomb Raider, but it was just the idea that Microsoft doesn't, prevent titles from going to the other console for the sake of keeping it from them. Yes, they do. And they did it right then and there. Like, it was so annoying. You look at State of Decay. State of Decay was another one. They did a deal and kept it on Xbox, and then they ended up buying the studio because it was like this cult classic. Cult classic. It was more of like an underground sort of game that the gem that sort of showed up, and it was like kind of janky, but it had something special there. No problem. Okay, I got no problem with that. It sucked because I was like, man, that game looks fun. I want to play it. It looks like my type of game. Never played the game because I don't have an Xbox. Titanfall 1. That is I can't remember the publisher. I'm sorry, that was the EA publisher. But man, I can't think of the dev. Regardless, doesn't matter. Titanfall, that game was locked away on Xbox. No one was fucking complaining. It was just smart, savvy business from Uncle Phil. Uncle Phil's just doing it. Sunset Overdrive, that game was made by Insomniac. Insomniac had before Sony purchased them, they had a really strong relationship with Sony already. They were making the Ratchet and Clank games for them. They were Sony exclusives, only on PlayStation. That was their baby. That was their agreement with Insomniac. Then Insomniac broke away for a year. Well, that's one. When I say a year, I mean like when the game was, announced, and then when it came out, it wasn't like they weren't making games for Sony anymore, but they made an exclusive deal with Microsoft to make Sunset Overdrive for Xbox only. My God, I've heard so many Xbox fans just say how fantastic that game is, and this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it's like, okay, that's fine, but where's the talk about blocking? Where's that conversation? Because they don't own Insomniac, and this was something that at the time everyone on the green side was just going crazy about it, like, oh my God, Microsoft, they're so smart, they're playing Sony at their own game, they're beating them at their own game, and all this other shit. It's like, okay, whatever, but again, locking shit away. Ori and the Blind Forest game looks amazing, never played it, don't have an Xbox, and I can't play it. That's not a first party game. They made a deal to publish that game and keep it away from Sony. I don't. This is the thing: is whenever Microsoft does it, it's smart or it's a good get. I've heard that term by a specific couple of people from the IGN group that now they have their own channels and shit. But back then, I kept hearing that term from the IGN podcasters, like, "Oh, this is a good get from them. This is smart, savvy, good get." I just kept hearing that shit over and over, and I was like, okay. But the moment the argument got some pushback, it's because they published the game. That's different. That's not the same. It's like bullshit. And you're telling me Sunset Overdrive couldn't have been published by a very successful studio? You're telling me that game never would have existed had Microsoft not given them the money? Bullshit. That's not true. The Tomb Raider thing, absolutely. And that one I was kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. They kind of bailed them out. They got their game to come out. So sure, they made a deal with them. We'll give you the money. You keep it on our system for a year, and then we'll release it to the other platform. No problem there. But, Titanfall, that game, what are we talking about here? Like EA doesn't have the money? Bullshit. They paid for exclusive rights. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not listing these games off to say this isn't fair or why don't I have them on PlayStation. No, I'm just illustrating a fact. This happens on both sides. Sony does it. Microsoft does it. But for some reason, this whole blocking shit when Microsoft said that, all of the Team Green and all of the media just ran with it. Like, this is some big discovery. Like, oh, look what we found out. Look at the evil corporation, Sony. This is weak. It's such a lame ass argument. And, that kind of moves me along to the next thing too, is, I think Microsoft, I've said this before and I'll get into a little bit later. I don't think they're managing their studios right. I think they're really poor at managing studios. I think Phil is overhyped. I think this guy is not as great as people make him out to be. I'm sorry. And I can give you plenty of examples of why I think that. Okay. It's not just some like, I don't like him because I don't like him. No, I don't like a person because of the things they do or the things they don't do or the shit that they say. But Microsoft is now purchasing publishers. So that argument of, well, Microsoft published those games, it was almost like there was like greasing the skids. I was like, because that's the argument I kept hearing, was that Microsoft is publishing these games, so therefore it's not the same. It's not, which is bullshit in and of itself, and I just proved that. But it was also like, now they're buying publishers. They're buying not just developers now. They bought Bethesda, they bought Activision Blizzard. Those are 3 very, very big publishers, huge. And now they're purchasing them. And again, it's a good get. It's smart business. It's savvy. And it's like, to me, now that's if there's one thing that I would say that I think that could be, I'm not saying it could be bad for gaming, is when you have both companies buying up all the developers and the publishers. That's different, because I don't think the competition is always good, and you're always going to get greatness from competition. But having 2 corporations just own everything, I don't think it's smart. I don't think that's a good idea for just anything. Whether it's movies, you look at Disney, they vacuumed up everything, and look what's happening. They're crapping out shitty content constantly, and they're crashing these franchises into the ground. They're not doing the right thing with them. So you could have that type of shit, and if like, let's just, as an example, let's say Warner Brothers went out and bought up everything else, and you just had 2 companies, that would fucking suck, because it's corporate. Like, corporations, huge corporations are not a good thing for art. They're not a good thing for entertainment, because they impact in such a large way that anyone at the top, whatever politics or whatever agenda they have, that will be filtered down through the entire thing. And you start to lose variety. You start to lose independent creative thinkers and creative artists. You lose that. And that's a bad thing. I think that's not good. Now, there are other publishers out there. Microsoft, I don't think they're going to buy anymore. They could. I mean, I keep hearing about how rich they are, and I'll talk about that too. But, I still think them buying publishers is like, that's not, people are cheering that shit on. It's like, man, you could be, beggars of your own demise. That really, it could be a problem, because if Sony fires back, and then Microsoft, and then Sony, and they just go back and forth, and all of a sudden it's like, there isn't a publisher or a developer that isn't a Sony or Microsoft studio, and I don't think that's a good thing. I would never want that. I like the variety. I think that's good for business. How many games have you played that were these quote unquote hidden gems, like the State of Decay, where you had a game come out and it's like, oh man, this game came out of nowhere. It's doing something new. It introduced something, it provided a different perspective on a game genre, and they hit it out of the park. And it's like, that's really cool. That probably, or most likely, that wouldn't have happened had it been like the corporate overlords pushing out, because they're only going to push out whatever makes them money. Look at the games for service, look at the pay to win model, look at microtransactions and battle passes and season passes and shit like that. These are all corporate decisions. Now, I'm sure that individual developers would do the same thing if they could. And I think it's spread across the industry like wildfire, but it's not, I don't think that's a good thing. And I don't think that money driving the art is something that's good. I don't look at that as a good thing. Now, moving along with this Microsoft buying publishers now, This sort of backs up the argument that I was just making that, it's pretty fucking ballsy and just hypocritical of Microsoft to make claims that Sony blocks games from Game Pass. And that's really what they're talking about. They're not talking about Xbox. They're talking about Game Pass. And we'll talk about that too. But, they bought up Bethesda, Activision Blizzard. Listen, okay, if they're not keeping games off of Sony, then why isn't Redfall coming to PlayStation? Why not? Why not Starfield? Why not the Skyrim sequel? Why not Fallout 5? Okay, they bought Bethesda, and those games are exclusives to Xbox. Now, I think I might have said this before, but I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to predict something. I think these games will come to PlayStation. I think so. I really, really do, because I don't think it's good for these games to just be thrown out on Game Pass. I don't. I have my opinions about Game Pass, and I can talk about it some more, but in a nutshell, I think it's a consumer bullshit model, and I don't think it's good for gaming. I just don't. That's just my opinion, and I think that there is plenty of evidence when you look at what's coming out on Game Pass right now, when you look at the lack of content, and a lot of the games just they're not bangers. There's nothing that's hot that's coming out on that Game Pass right now. There's plenty of good. I'm not saying there's nothing coming out. That's not my point. My point is you get what you pay for. When you skimp on quality, when you try to get that discount, you can't bitch when you don't get good shit. And I think Microsoft taking Bethesda, sticking with this developer / publisher, we saw Starfield, and that's sort of a Bethesda thing, but now they're Bethesda Microsoft, so that's on them as well. Starfield didn't look good. It didn't come out and look fucking great. I thought it looked okay. I thought there were some promising things there, but it didn't look good. That was not a good launch. That just didn't hit like it should have. I think that you can't keep throwing content out on like a Netflix subscription style thing, which is what Microsoft wants to do. Eventually, you're going to flood the market with a bunch of mediocre shit because it's just going to be all about titles. All they talk about is how much they have. Like, there's so many games, there's so many titles, you get access to all this stuff and this and that. And it's like, okay, but how much of it is like really top-notch quality fine dining? Or is it all just fast food? Is it just, do I feel like having a burger from McDonald's, Burger King, or Wendy's, Whataburger, In-N-Out? It's like, it's you're still getting a burger. It's like, okay, it's just another burger, but okay, I like this one a little bit better, and that one was pretty good. I mean, where's the fine dining? Where's that grade A U.S. steak? Where's that ribeye or that tomahawk ribeye? Like, where's that good shit? And I haven't seen Microsoft supply that to their their subscribers. Just haven't seen it yet. But again, going back to just, sticking to this, the Bethesda thing is, they're keeping right now, as it stands, they're keeping those games from PlayStation. They're intentionally keeping them from them. I'm going to predict, and I'm going to say, I think these games will come to PlayStation at some point. That's just me. I think Microsoft is smart enough to know that they could use the money because of so many PlayStations that are in the wild right now. They could really use that money. That would be very profitable for them. And I don't mean they can use the money like they're broke. I mean, they want to grow their business. It's all about making more money. That's going to make them money. So I don't know. I'm going to put like just a little pin in that one. I think some of these games are going to come to PlayStation. But so let's move along here. The next thing I want to talk about, because this, like I said, I listen to a lot of creators, a lot. I listen to a lot of small-time creators, big-time, read tons and tons of comments, and I was hearing some fucking silly shit. Just some silly-ass arguments. So one of the things is like Sony, one of the arguments was Sony has been playing this sort of evil game with third-party studios. They've been making these deals, buying these exclusive. Let me wet my whistle. Buying exclusivity deals and making them with third-party studios so that they could have those games on their consoles so that they could sell more consoles. That's apparently that's like an evil thing. Like Sony is the villain in every Xbox Defenders story. Like they are the villain. Everything Sony does is something wrong with it. They're wrong. And if Sony would just get out of the way, then the world would be perfect. It's sheep. It's sheep mentality. They just parrot. I hear somebody parroting of just, they're regurgitating bullshit. But I just thought, I'm just tired of listening to that, like third-party deals that Sony has been making forever. Like they act like Microsoft never did. And now they're actually, the argument is Microsoft is getting back at them. Microsoft is playing their own game back at them. And now Sony's crying and Sony fanboys and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, no. What annoyed me was the fact that they said that they don't do that. Like they spoke as though Microsoft doesn't block. Yeah, they do. They do. They have exclusives. They pay for them. There's nothing wrong with it. But the story is that Sony's evil. One of the other things too that I heard, and I heard this in a chat. I was in I've never been anyone who gets into comments or chats. I love reading them and I love watching people argue, but I've never really engaged because I'm not the best at like quick typing shit. Like I'm better at talking. Like I can debate someone face to face. No problem. I have no problem talking to someone, looking them in the eye and having a conversation. And even if we totally disagree on shit, I can still have that conversation. But when it comes to like writing shit out, I'm just not really good at it, especially on the fly, because in chat rooms or what do you call them? Like live stream chats, the shit's just kind of blowing by so fast. It's like, who you talking to, right? You say something, it's like, it just goes past the screen in just a split second, especially if you have those bigger streams. But I actually got in on a stream with a smaller channel that I watch, and they're really good. It's a game. Channel's called the Saltiest Gamer, or yeah, I think it's called Saltiest Gamer. He has a weekly show with some other cats, and I like their show. I've been listening to it for a long time. I recommend it. Go check it out. But I actually dove into their chat. I was listening to their Thursday show, and I just started, kind of just felt like, you know what, I'm just gonna try to engage, make some comments and whatever. But inside of that live chat, and also in other comments on videos and shit, one of the things that I kept seeing was that Microsoft is only $500,000 units. I'm sorry, 500,000 units behind Sony in the U.S. So Microsoft is a half a million units behind in this market, in the U.S. market, and Sony's scared and they know it's coming. And I just thought, I was like, wait a minute, if I'm not mistaken, worldwide, Sony is around 5 million, over 5 million more units sold, more PS5 sold than Xbox Series X and S. And that's another thing too that's really fucking annoying, is that they have two consoles. Okay, so this argument, like, oh, they're nipping at their heels and they're about to overtake them. And I saw that a lot. Like Microsoft is about to overtake Sony in the console market. Sony hasn't lost a single console war, if you want to call it that. They haven't lost one yet. They always outsell Microsoft, but that's not a bad thing. That's not like Microsoft is trash or they don't know how to make a good console or anything. I think they are struggling. I think if anything, looking at what Microsoft's doing, to me, they look desperate. To me, they look like they are worried about Sony. They want to. And that's where Game Pass came from, and that's where this buying publishers and these gigantic studios are coming from. That's just my opinion. But the thing about the console sales, it's like, okay, that's a stupid argument. Microsoft has millions of consoles to sell, and Sony has to stop selling consoles for them to pass them. I don't know why Sony would be scared. The other thing too was they have two consoles. Microsoft has two consoles right now. Okay. They have what they've said. This is their words. They have the most powerful console in the world, the Microsoft Series X. I'm sorry, the Xbox Series X, the most powerful console. Okay, they haven't shown it. I haven't seen any game on the Series X that justifies the price tag, because it's $100 more. I think it's $600 for an Xbox Series X. It's $500 for a PlayStation 5. As it stands today, PlayStation has been outshining Microsoft in the technical arena, for sure. Now, I think they've been outclassed them in a lot more ways, but just looking at hardware wise, the PlayStation 5 is putting out better picture, better quality, better frame rate over the Series X, over the most powerful console in the world. And they've been doing it handily since the fucking launch of the console. And the argument about them catching up or about to pass them, it's like, okay, they have this super powerful console. They're not really, we haven't seen it stretch its legs at all, but they also have this very small, a lot less powerful console that they're calling current gen. They're calling it like this is the current gen. The Series S and the Series X are both being grouped together as their sales. That's bullshit. I don't look at that. I mean, I would love to know, because to me the Series S is not it's not even close to a PS5. Technically, it can't do what PlayStation 5 can do. And if you were to take away the S sales, I think that Microsoft would be, I think they would have, instead of being just 5 million behind, they'd probably be more like 8, maybe even 10 million behind PlayStation. That's just my guess. These numbers are not hard numbers. There's a lot of what do you call it? There's a lot of like reports about things that Sony has said and Microsoft has said that and I think Sony is the only one who's really kind of saying what they've sold, but I think they might even be saying more like what they shipped. But regardless, everyone in the industry understands that the PS5 is outselling both of Xbox's consoles because they have two, okay, and they are riding on the coattails of a much cheaper, weaker console. That shit just gets overlooked constantly. No one wants to talk about that. Another thing that I heard this a while back too. So when the argument about 2020, like, oh, Microsoft is struggling and what's going on, like that one chick who said some shit about Starfield and how 2020 affected everybody and blah, blah, blah. And she was running cover, whoever this person was, and other people were running cover for them as well. They were using the 2020 argument, like, oh, the 2020 thing. And it's like, wait, this is 2022. Like, we're getting close to 23, so we're almost 3 years away from that. And Sony is still dropping games, quality, very pretty, very well performed, very, very well performing games on their PS5, and they're not breaking a sweat. Like, they're not struggling and like, oh my God, they can't make a good game because of 2020. It's like that argument is tired, and I'm really tired of that argument. But coming out of that 2020 argument I don't remember where this originated from, and I think it was just kind of a rumor. But there was this talk about Microsoft had paid for chip priority. They're the bigger company. They make more money. I kept hearing that too. $1 trillion company. That they were paying for chip priority for their microchips, for the chips that go into their consoles, because what's inside of the Xbox and what's inside the PlayStation is very similar. Okay, the architecture is different in terms of like the software and how they optimize it, I guess. I'm not a super tech guy, but I know the chips are very similar and that they're being made by the same companies. So I heard some people who have like their big channels. They were saying some shit about how that can't happen. That's a made up thing. That's illegal. And Microsoft couldn't do that. And if Microsoft did, then there would be this really big problem. There would be, there'd be illegal, and there'd be this issue with like, the government, and that's not cool. And so I have to share something, because I don't know where the fuck that came from. I don't know where that argument came from, that it's illegal and that Microsoft wouldn't or couldn't do this. And that's illegal. They can't do it. I worked in the tech industry for over 4 years, making in a company that was making silicon. They were making microchips or chips, however you want to call them. We just call them chips. But it was a silicon company, okay? And we were not a huge company. We were much, much smaller than, our competition. But in that tech industry, in the chip business, this whole thing of how the big dog won't eat first, that's bullshit. That's total bullshit. It happens. I know it does. I know it 100% happens. We had very large customers and we had very small customers, okay? The big customers who paid our bills, kept the lights on, they got priority every time. Our goal was to supply everybody. We wanted everyone to eat because it's more profit for us, more money for us. But there were bigger companies that got the priority 100%. And smaller companies, we would ask them to bump out their needs to the next month or the next quarter because we just didn't, the capacity constraints or whatever. That was us with our customers. On the flip side, our manufacturers, they were the ones who were pumping out the production side of shit, right? We were, like I said, a small company. There were much, much bigger companies that could buy us 100 times over. They got priority over us. So, our chips were being made right next to our competition. They were just really, really big. Okay. And there were some other people or other companies that were smaller than us, but regardless, when it came time to make a decision, the production sites would always give the bigger companies the priority because they paid more. Okay. If I go into a dealership, a car dealership, and I go in to buy a brand new car, right? And I say, hey, I want this car. The guy's like, yeah, no problem. Yeah. And then I'm like, hey, I want you to hold this for me. I want this car. It's going to happen. Let me go talk to the wife. And then while I walk out, a woman walks in and she works for a corporation and she says, hey, I need to buy a fleet of cars. I need 20 cars for my company to make these company cars. That guy is going to call me right away and be like, hey man, sorry dude, I didn't know that car was already taken by somebody else. He's not going to even give two shits about me, the individual, versus this other person who comes in with a corporation backing and saying he wants to buy 20 of those cars. They're going to sell the 20. And because if that person says it's either 20 or I'm going across the street, they're going to be like, hey guy, me. They're going to say, we're sorry, you have to wait. That's just business. That's just normal business. So this whole thing, and I don't know where that came from. Like, that's illegal. Microsoft can't do that. That there's no way that happened because Microsoft would get in trouble. That's bullshit. That's total bullshit. That is not true. Okay. And it doesn't even make common sense. When I heard that, I'm like, that doesn't make what? What are they trying to say? I'm like, oh no, that would be against the law. And it's like, bullshit. No, it's not. How is that against the law? And that argument, I think, fell flat on its face in my head. And I never really talked about it. I never really spoke on it. And then I started seeing this come up again in the comments. I started seeing this in videos, and it's like, yeah, they did. Let me rephrase that. Yeah, they could, and they probably did. Microsoft probably paid to have more. They probably paid more money. They probably bought more chips because they have the bigger pocketbook. It just makes sense. So I think they probably did. And I'm just tired of that argument. Like, oh, that can't happen. That's impossible. That's illegal. No, it's not. That's not a thing. I don't know who the fuck said it was, but that's not a thing. And getting back to, why I was sharing this with you is Sony, you couldn't find a PlayStation. I had to wait for months before I got my PlayStation. And it was like, I had to get in there and like, I was on Discord waiting for people who are out there scanning, saying like, oh, Target has some, or Walmart has some, Best Buy has some. And I swung and missed several times before I finally locked one down. And I had to spend more money than I wanted to spend because at that point, they were just selling bundles. But you look at Microsoft, they haven't had any problems with supply at all. You can go get a Series X, you can get a Series S right now. And PlayStation 5s are still kind of scarce. You can get one. I'm not saying you can't. But there was not even a competition there. You could always get an Xbox. You could not always get a PlayStation 5. And to me, just common sense, I look at that and I'm like, yeah, sure. They probably paid for, priority. I would have. If I'm Microsoft, hell, I would do that. Why not? Why not? It's a competition. It's business. So that one I just had to share because that was always bugging me. It always annoyed me that people would say that shit, and I still see it today. So the other couple of things that people were saying, which were cracking me up. One was like, I kept hearing that like console wars suck, fanboys suck. I'm tired of the fanboy fanning the flames of the console wars while they're touting their system. And I'm sorry, but listen, I know I come on here and it probably sounds like you just hate Microsoft. I don't hate Microsoft, okay? They just don't have anything that I want right now. And when they do, I'm going to give them my money. I'll gladly hand over my debit card for a product that I really want because I'm a customer. I'm not a consumer. I'm not just going to pick up everything, buy everything. It's just those days are behind me. I don't, first of all, I don't have the time. Second of all, I'm not going to do that with my money. I don't just hand over my money to anything and everything. But this idea that it's like the fanboy shit and the console wars, it really is coming from the green side. Like I'm hearing that a lot from a lot of the videos that I've been watching. Cause again, I was watching, Sony videos, like Sony content creators. I was listening to Xbox content creators, and I was listening to the ever popular agnostic. I have everything I have every console creator, which is so annoying. But they always say, oh, fanboys and console wars suck while they make a fanboy console war video to get clicks to get paid. It's like, shut the fuck up. Like, just stop it. That's so annoying, and it's so see-through. Just cut that shit out. The other thing too was these are a couple of things that I heard, and I'm just going to kind of run through these real quick because I had to write them down because I was listening to a couple of videos and I'm like, what the fuck, really? These guys are saying some really stupid shit. And one video I was watching, this guy said he's breaking down the what was it? I think he was breaking down the documents. Yeah, I think he was breaking down the documents and like the stuff that had come from the Brazil documents or whatever. And he said, Game Pass is making money, and we know that because Microsoft said so. Really? So they said so therefore it's fact. Of course they're going to say that. Why wouldn't they say that? That was the guy's fucking logic. His logic was Microsoft said so it's true. That's just it. They're making money. Game Pass they're just rolling in the dough over there because of Game Pass. I haven't heard that yet. I haven't heard Microsoft, and believe me, if Microsoft was printing their own money with this service, they would probably be talking about it. They would definitely be talking about it. Just like they don't talk about how many consoles they sell because they're not in lead, and Sony does talk about their consoles because they are in the lead. It's just business. It's the way shit goes. And another thing too, that the response was, the other point that he was making with this Microsoft is making money off Game Pass was that Sony is just frustrated and they're scared because they can't compete with Game Pass. They don't have a subscription service. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like PlayStation Plus doesn't exist. Okay. And furthermore, one of the things that the argument that I kept hearing was like, Sony is chasing Microsoft and their format. They're chasing Game Pass. They want Game Pass. They don't. Trust me. If they did, they would have just done it. Okay. I think that they're doing two different things. I still think that. However, Sony had to respond to Game Pass because they needed to hedge a bet. They absolutely hedged their bet with the the restructure and the tier system of the PlayStation Plus subscription. They did that in a response to Game Pass. Now, I personally don't think that Sony is looking to be like Amazon to Microsoft's Netflix. I don't think that's what they're trying to do because they structured their shit completely different. Okay. But they did respond, and it was so funny because that argument just really collapsed on itself because it was like Microsoft is doing something that Sony can't compete with, and Sony doesn't have anything to respond with. And then it was like, and then when they restructured it, it was because they're scared. And it's like, so are they, what's your point? Like, what's your point? Yes, I think Sony reacted. I think they needed to build a system because the PlayStation Plus, the subscription service itself, it was ready to grow. It was time to change, and they needed to change with the times. But the argument was like, Sony can't compete and Sony doesn't have anything to compete. That's not true. Because I watched plenty of videos about how Microsoft scared Sony into restructuring their thing. And it's like, okay, fine, whatever. But this guy's argument just didn't make sense to me. Another thing this guy said, he said, Microsoft can upsell their games on Game Pass after they released. How is that a thing? What are you talking about? I mean, I assume the point that was trying to be made was that Microsoft is releasing games on Game Pass, and then they take them off Game Pass after a certain amount of time, and then they make you pay for them. I don't have Game Pass. Maybe that's how it's going, but I mean, all I hear about is how many games are on the subscription service when you pay for it. They're just there, okay? Now, I'm sure, just like Netflix, things rotate off the docket. Just like Amazon Prime, things roll through and it's like, oh, free with Prime this month. Okay, there, maybe that's a structure that they're doing, but this whole thing of like, oh, they're making money off these games, and that was the argument, was like, oh, games being released on Game Pass, they're not losing money because Microsoft is going to upsell them. It's like, how? That was just a statement that was made. No supporting facts, no arguments, just statements being made. And I kept hearing shit like that, and I kept reading shit like that too. What was the other one here? Oh, you know what? That's right. I made a note of something. So one of the things that I was listening to a podcast, and a podcast that I like, an Xbox podcast that I actually like. And I listened to them talk about this whole thing. And one of the people on the podcast said that they don't like Call of Duty. They're not a Call of Duty person. They don't play Call of Duty. But if it's free, or, you know, quote unquote free, or with the subscription of Game Pass, they might check it out. They might try it. And to me, that was the thing that really, I was like, that's the difference right there. Because Microsoft has conditioned their subscribers to expect games to just come on Game Pass day and date. They just expect it, and I see it a lot, and I hear it a lot. But when this person was saying this, it just sort of struck a chord with me, and I was like, that just kind of proves the point right there, that they really do. They want the games that they like to be on the system, on the service. And furthermore, they would play a game that they might not play on a regular basis. They wouldn't pay for. They might play this game because it's on Game Pass. And also, they wouldn't pay for it if it wasn't on Game Pass. That's, I mean, listen, that's a consumer mindset. That's not a customer mindset. Okay? I totally get, you don't want to pay for a game that you don't want to play. That makes total sense. But the thing was, it was like the notion of, if it's on Game Pass, then I'm gonna play it, but I'm not gonna pay for it. I will not pay for that game, you know. And it's like that to me, it just struck me weird. It didn't sit right with me, because how is that good for that game? How is that good for that title? You know, because that was part of the argument, was that Game Pass is good for games. Game Pass is good for these gaming titles, these big titles like COD and, you know, Fallout, and these games that are going to be coming or whatever, they're going to be on Game Pass with the subscription service. It was like, this is really good for gaming studios, and how gaming studios make money. They make a good amount of money being on that subscription service. I'm sorry, they don't. Okay, and here's my example. Elden Ring has been selling like gangbusters. I think they're over like 13 million units sold, or copies sold, I'm sorry. If that game was on Game Pass day and date, and people who subscribe to Game Pass didn't have to pay for that game, they wouldn't pay for that game. And that game would not be selling like it is right now. It wouldn't. And FromSoft would not be making the stacks of money that they're making right now off that game. It just wouldn't have happened. And that's, to me, is like this. The argument that I've been hearing is like Game Pass being good for games, and it's good for it, you know, studios. Studios want to be on Game Pass. I don't agree with that. I really don't. Because if they did, then the quality games like Elden Ring would have been on Game Pass. But they weren't, because FromSoft is smart. They know that if they take like a, you know, I'm just going to throw out a number. Let's just say Microsoft's like, hey, we're going to give you a flat fucking $30 million or a flat $60 million to put your game day and date on Game Pass. They know that they have a quality game. FromSoft does. They know that they're going to make a shit ton of money if they just sell it to the public, because the paying customers will pay for it. But Microsoft would be stepping in to be the consumer friendly one and say, well, we'll give you this money. And then they're going to in hopes that they're going to get rich off of it, that they'll get some more subs, they'll get some more advertising, it will make them money. But it's like someone has to make money. And why would FromSoft want to have a middleman? Like, that's always the thing in business, right? Cut out the middleman, go to the source. Why would you want to create a middleman? And that's what Game Pass is to me. To me, Game Pass is that middleman saying, hey, come to me, I'll give you whatever you need, and then I'm going to make all the money off this though, okay? But I'm going to pay you. I'm going to pay you up front, but I'm going to get everything on the back end over here. That's just not good business. That's not good business. So this argument that, Game Pass is good for gaming developers and because it gives them, I heard it was like it's like free advertising and it gets them, it makes them visible. Like it puts them on the radar. Like so many games are on Game Pass that I would have never played had they not been on Game Pass. That means you would have never paid that developer for a copy of that game. That means that developer would not have made money and or their publisher. How is that good for them? It's good for you. It's good for the consumer. And that is hands down a fact. Game Pass is good for the consumer. 100%. I'm not disputing that. But to hear the argument that Game Pass is good for games and developers, that it's going to make them money, it's not. And that just doesn't make any mathematical sense to me. And listening to some of these people say that shit, it's like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? That doesn't make sense. And furthermore, I keep hearing a lot of these arguments being made, but there's no like facts or anything. There's no supporting anything. There's no logic to it. It's just, this is good for it because it's good for it. Because it's consumer friendly, it's good. And it's like, well, break it down. How is that? How would that have been good for FromSoft to put that game day and date on Game Pass? They would have lost millions, tens, hundreds of millions probably. They would have lost so much money. Why the hell would they want to put a middleman between them and the customer? I don't hear that. That logic just doesn't work for me. And so moving along here, that was the one thing that was just one of the many things that I kept hearing. And there's a guy that and I don't have any problem with this guy. His name's Gary Whitta, and he back in the day when I used to listen to Kinda Funny, and I severed ties with them after what happened with Colin Moriarty and that whole how that went down. I was out. I was done. That Kinda Funny, just that whole thing that happened, I didn't agree with. I thought it was bullshit, and and I'm not crying for Colin. He's got his own corporation. He's doing great. Probably the best thing that ever happened to the guy. But just in the moment when everything went down, I was like, these guys are kind of grimy. Like they just kind of put their best friend out to pasture, because of social media pressure. Bullshit. I just didn't like that. But regardless, there's a guy. His name's Gary Whitta. And I believe he was the writer for Rogue One, the movie, which is a decent movie. It's not fantastic. I thought it was pretty decent. I mean, looking back, it's not. Everyone talks about one thing on that movie, and that's the Vader scene at the very end, because that was an awesome scene. But if you take away that Vader scene from that movie, does that movie have a place in your heart? I don't think so. That's just my opinion. But regardless, so this guy Gary was on Kinda Funny's podcast or a live stream or something like that. And I guess he made a statement that this game that just came out, I think it came out last week, it's called Cult of the Lamb. It's a smaller like indie / AA studio. They made this game that just came out, and he made the comment that Sony was blocking, or Sony had attempted to block that game from Microsoft and like pay Devolver Studio to keep it off of Game Pass. And that, to me, when I heard that, I was like, what? I actually heard that. I saw that come up on the live stream that I was watching. I was watching the live stream podcast, and then I saw that shit fly through on the chat, and I was like, what? I hadn't heard that, and a couple people had said it, and I was like, what the hell? So I went and looked it up. So anyways, this guy says this shit, right? And like, it just got ran with. Everyone ran with it, because this guy, ooh, there's some thunder. Hey, just FYI, I'm in Texas, and we're supposed to get some storms coming through. So I just heard some pretty loud thunder. So if that comes through on the mic, sorry if it bothers you or if it's like disruptive. It obviously disrupted me because it broke me right out of my train of thought. But anyways, so this guy said this about Devolver Studios, and that Sony was paying them extra money, or tried to pay them to keep that from Microsoft Game Pass. And it's so funny because that shit was said right on the heels, right in the midst of all this shit with the Activision Blizzard story. it felt to me like it was like, what? And furthermore, I guess the guy was saying this based on a tweet. I don't know shit about Twitter. I don't give a fuck about Twitter. Twitter is a fucking cesspool in my opinion. I have no love for that fucking format. Sorry if you're a big fan of it. It's just my personal opinion. But I guess like YouTube or Instagram or TikTok, they have followers or whatever. And apparently this Twitter account that Gary had got this information from had like 28 followers. So I guess that meant like, what are you doing? Why would you believe that? To me, I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't know shit about Twitter. I don't know what would be good or what would be bad information. But he goes on a live stream and says this shit, and then like media ran with it. It was on the big sites, the big media sites, and they were all capping, saying shit like, look what Sony did and blah, blah, blah. And this furthers the point that Microsoft is making about them, and Sony's evil or they're lame or whatever. It turned out to be total bullshit. And Devolver Studio actually came out and made a statement and saying that what this guy said was 100% false. That is not true. And that's the type of shit that really gets annoying because, number one, if you don't know for sure, like if you read a tweet and you're like, oh, that's true, that's never a good thing. Furthermore, if you read a tweet and then you spit that shit off on a live stream in like a way to like gin up some controversy and to gin up a click, you're going to get busted. You're going to get busted. And that was a lame thing that he said. And again, I ain't got nothing against this guy. Say whatever you're going to say, but now you got egg on your face. And now to me, that channel has egg on its face because you let that shit go out. There was no checking, there was no nothing, but this guy just pops off and says it. And once again, it's like, oh, look, Sony being bad, Sony being evil corporation, Sony. And the other thing too that I really thought was annoying about Sony being this bad corporation, I kept hearing so much about how Microsoft is $1 trillion company. Microsoft can buy Sony 10 times over. Microsoft can buy all this stuff. They can afford all these things. And, and they're not even the same. They're in a different level than Sony. Sony is just a little something. And they have to play dirty pool to win. And it's so funny because I kept hearing just how much like Microsoft, like them doing this to Sony was some get back because Sony had been fucking with them, getting exclusive deals and shit. And then they were also saying that, what was it? Oh man, I just drew a blank. It was that, so Sony was scared of Microsoft. So they were doing this shit with the legal shit. They were making these comments. And then Microsoft's over here. Now they come back out and they start talking like, look what Sony does to us. They've been undermining us and they've been doing all this shit. And it's like, wait. So are you the $1 trillion company? Are you the 400-pound gorilla on the block? Or are you a little weakling that needs protection and needs these fucking media and these creators to run cover for you? What are you? And that argument just kept going back and forth. And it's just like, I thought you were $1 trillion company. Microsoft can buy anything and everything. They're doing it right now. They just bought two big developers/publishers to intentionally lock content away. Not all content, because Call of Duty is going to be on PlayStation. They already said that. Okay. I guess there's like a 3-year deal, but it doesn't mean that they can, it doesn't mean they can't lock it away from Sony at some point. They own everything. They can easily just say, no, we're not going to put it on PlayStation anymore. They can do that whenever they choose. Okay. But it's like, how is Sony the villain? How are they just so bad? They're the smaller company. They're the smaller company. They're doing everything they can with their means that they have. Microsoft's this $1 trillion company. They're so big and badass, but yet they sit there, complain about Sony undercutting them and Sony quote unquote blocking them, which is bullshit. They're saying that Sony is making exclusive deals and Microsoft doesn't. They're acting like they don't, but they do. But you're the bigger company. Don't you think, just for a second, don't you think that it's possible that Microsoft is just making poor decisions? That Phil Spencer is making poor decisions with the Xbox brand and the deals that he's making with third-party studios and the things that's going on, closing studios, games coming out broken, games coming out looking like shit. Don't you think that seems more logical? Like the reason why they're doing this, that they're buying these publishers now and these big ones, is because they need to. They want to beat Sony. and they have the money to do it. And furthermore, they couldn't beat Sony at their own game. The $1 trillion company couldn't beat the $1 billion company at their own game. You know, it's like, I don't know, just that argument that it just didn't make sense. Like a lot of it just doesn't track with me. You know, listening to the people on the creators, these live streams, these podcasts, and watching the comments, it just sounds to me like excuses. It's always an excuse. The goalpost constantly gets moved about Microsoft and what they're doing and Phil Spencer and how great he is. And then they make moves like this, and it's good for gaming, and Game Pass is good for consumers, and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, and Sony's this evil company over here. And it's like, none of that tracks well with me. It just doesn't, there's no facts to suggest that that's what's going on. They're both corporations. They're both going to take shots at each other. They're both going to try to stop each other. They're both going to try to win. That's the fucking point, is to win. So what's with this? What's with the excuses? Really? Like, that's the question. Like, why all the excuses, you know? So anyways, let's move along here. Let's start wrapping this up. It's getting kind of late. So one of the things that, you know, and I said this on the live stream too, in the chat, and I truly believe this, and I've said this about myself, but you know, when I was talking about how, you know, gamers are conditioned now, on the Xbox side, they're conditioned to want things for, like, quote unquote free. They want their games day and date, no matter how big, no matter how much they cost. They want those games day and date on the service. And it really just dawned on me. I was just like, you know, consumers and customers are two different people. They are not the same. And to me, a consumer wants shit for free. They want things for free. And a customer wants quality. Consumer wants free. Customer wants quality. And customers are willing to pay for quality. They are looking for quality. And they criticize when it isn't quality. When they pay their money, their hard-earned money, and they don't get quality, they complain about it. They make a fuss about it because, hey, I paid you my money. What the fuck? And that's, to me, that seems more of like Sony's brand. Sony has made a name in the industry as having the quality games on their service, on their console. The games that come out are solid. They run great. They play great. It's just good quality experiences. And you can not like the games that they make. That's totally fine. That is subjective. But those games come out and they fucking look amazing. They sound amazing and they play amazing. Okay? And then you look at Microsoft and Xbox and what they're doing, and it's just they're a $1 trillion company that has this consumer-friendly service, and yet the games that they're putting out just aren't hitting it. Say what you want about Halo coming out last year. That game is not doing well. It's not looking good right now. Okay? They're a $1 trillion company with a consumer-friendly service. Not a single AAA title, first-party studio game is coming out in 2022. That's some bullshit. If you are the 400-pound gorilla, you can force your way into making that happen. And to me, they shouldn't have to throw their money around to make quality games. I think they're not making quality games because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. I do not think Phil Spencer knows what he is doing. He just doesn't. There's no proof in the Xbox One and the Xbox now, I guess what, S, X, or Xbox Series, their naming convention is so, again, what the fuck? It's just so many things, right? But Phil Spencer has proven that during the last gen and this gen, they are missing the mark. And they are thriving off of Game Pass. That is their only claim to fame. Could you imagine if Game Pass didn't exist? I don't even know if that console, what the future of that console could be. You know, because they're just not managing studios right. They're making poor decisions. They're allowing fucking shit quality to come out the door, and they're expecting everyone to be okay with it because so many of the consumers, they defend it. So many of the Xbox consumer fan base, they defend it. They make excuses. They move the goalpost. And it's just like, when I watch it and I see it, it's like, when are you ever going to hold them accountable? When is Microsoft and Phil Spencer, when is their fan base, when is their consumers going to hold them accountable? And to me, I think the answer is never. The answer is never. because they have built that consumer model. They have built that model of pay us monthly, give us that money every single month, give us money, or once a year, that annual subscription fee, whatever it is, give us that monthly money, and then we'll give you what we can. All right. But don't be complaining. Don't be bitching, and there's so many people out there who defend it. So many people run cover for Xbox when, Craig comes out, when the Craig memes come, when the Battle Pass with Halo comes out, when no games come out in 2022, when Starfield gets delayed, when Redfall gets delayed. It's just constant cover. And, and I keep hearing, wait until next year. Next year is going to be lit. Next year is going to be fire. There's so many games. And then I saw so many comments where they people defending the shit would list off like 5 or 6 games. All of them, if not, okay, I won't say all of them. I will say most of them, if not all of them, were supposed to come out in 2022. Okay, and Sony delays games. I'm not saying they don't. But Microsoft doesn't have a single game coming out in 2022. Not a single AAA first-party studio game. And I'm getting the 2020 argument. I'm getting the chip shortage argument. I'm getting, Microsoft has to worry about big bad Sony being mean and with exclusive deals and just all this shit. And it's like, man, Microsoft just has paid opposition in the fucking media space. They are there to constantly oppose anything that Sony does, and they're constantly there to run cover and move the goalpost for anything that Microsoft does. And again, it's like Microsoft, they have all of this money. It's why don't you have quality over there? Why isn't there quality shit coming out on a regular basis? Phil Spencer himself said, the plan and the goal is to have a AAA game come out 4 times a year. Once a quarter, you will get a AAA game. I heard someone bring that up, and then the defender was like, "Oh, that was just what? So what? So because they're not doing it yet? Oh, they failed. That was just a goal. Oh, so what? It's just a goal. You can't hold them accountable for goals." And it's like, yeah, but he's telling you he's going to do it. Like that's the plan, and that was like how many years ago he said that? 3-4 years ago, and now you have a full year when not a single game comes out. How do you defend that? And it's confusing. It's just confusing. I don't get it. And you look at the games that they've had. You look at the they haven't been successful with their studios, and so now they're buying publishers, right? And if you look at the games that have come out, and I just grabbed some that were on there, and these are ones that, obviously I picked these games for a reason because they were trouble for them. You look at Halo Infinite, that was a problem. That it came out to a fucking resounding thud, looked like trash, got delayed a full fucking year, then it comes out. I felt like there was a lot of cover for that game as it is. Like today, there's still people saying how great that game looks. And I look at it, I'm like, that game looks like last gen. Like it looks like last gen. Every tree in that game looks exactly the same. Then they're stuck. They're static. They don't move. It's like there's no wind. There's no nothing. It's so whatever. Then you have State of Decay 2. The State of Decay came out, was this little hidden gem. Then Microsoft comes in with their big pocketbook, and they're talking about how they're it's gonna get bigger and better, and they're gonna fund them to really grow that franchise. Then State of Decay 2 comes out and totally flops. It runs like total shit. It crashes. Gameplay problems across the board. It was like, so money didn't solve that problem. It doesn't solve everything, and obviously didn't for that game. Sea of Thieves supposed to come out. It was just, and again, I know Sea of Thieves has rebounded, and games do that. But that game was delayed like 2 times, I think, 3 times. And when it came out, it was like, where's the content? And there was tons of coverage and tons of goalposts moving for that shit. Crackdown 3, that game was supposed to be a Series X launch game or some shit. It was just that game comes out and it's just total trash. Looks like trash. It looks like a Xbox 360 game. It just didn't look good. You had another franchise like Fable. Like what happened to Fable? That's like one of their claims to fame is the Fable franchise. Like, Xbox fans love that franchise from the old days. And then they come out with Fable Legends, and they're pushing that to capitalize on some fucking bullshit. Like what was it, like 4v1 or something? I can't remember what it was. Like some Dungeon Master or whatever. And then it was so stupid. This multiplayer crap. It looked like trash. And I never even touched Fable. Never played any Fable games. But when I saw that game, I'm like, that looks like trash. Like, what the hell is this? They cancel that game. They close the studio. They've just made a lot of mistakes. And they're still making mistakes to this day. And when I look at this type of shit and I see the comments and I see the defenders and the creators out there, there's just no arguments to be made. All I hear is excuses. And I keep hearing, wait until next year. Next year's going to be awesome. I heard that last year. Okay. You look at Bethesda, they bought Bethesda, and it's like Redfall. I think Redfall looks pretty cool. Like, pretty cool. It doesn't look amazing, but looked pretty cool. It's like, okay, that's a decent game. Fallout 76 was trash. Fallout 4 was like, meh, it was okay. Then you look at Starfield, had a terrible debut. Then it got delayed a whole year. It's like, it's like that stench. It's like the stench of Microsoft and how they've been running their studios. Then they go out and grab Bethesda, who, to me, my personal opinion, I don't think Bethesda's all that great. Their games are always broken. They depend on their modding community to come in and save their shit. There's a modding community out there right now who are already talking about how they're going to fix the fucking game of Starfield. Like, they're modding it to fix what they saw because it was so evident that there were problems in that debut of Starfield. They're already talking about fixing it. That's not good. That's not a good thing, And it's like Bethesda has been relying on modders to fix their games and make them better. They've been doing it with the Fallout franchise, the Skyrim or Elder Scrolls franchise. Now Bethesda's underneath Microsoft's umbrella, and it's like, what a perfect home, perfect place for them, because they both do the same shit. They both put out, they have been putting out like low tier, low quality, just shit. Nothing that's worth, like, nothing that's, to me, that has the quality level that's worth me forking over money to them. But it's perfect for Game Pass. Like, what they put out is perfect for Game Pass because it's consumer-friendly, low-quality stuff. It's Netflix. It's Netflix. Netflix is low tier to me. It's low quality. They have, like, 10 good shows on a platform that has thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe. I don't know. But that's what Game Pass is. That's what it is, So, but to sum up, just talking about the publisher deal with Activision and Blizzard. I do think Sony will respond. I think that they will buy a publisher. I don't know which one. I'll save that for another video. But I do think they will. But I just don't think it's going to be near as big as the Activision Blizzard or even Bethesda. I just don't. Maybe it's like Square Enix or something like that. But I mean, now Square does have big, it's got a big brand. But I'm just saying, I'd have to look at it and kind of, just look at like what they have in place with them already, because Bethesda had a good relationship with Microsoft before they bought them. So, and Sony had a great relationship with Insomniac when they purchased them. So I'm thinking in that lines. But all right, I'm gonna wrap it up. It's late. So thank you for taking the time. I appreciate you stopping by. If you haven't clicked the video, I'm sorry. If you haven't liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Click subscribe. Click the notification bell. As you can tell, I'm tired and I'm ready to go to bed. But thank you for taking the time, and I will see you next week. You have a great night. Bye.